There is a specific kind of pain that does not come from being attacked by an enemy. It comes from being betrayed by someone you trusted, someone you defended when others doubted them, someone you extended yourself for, vouched for, made room for in your life and your inner circle. And the thing that makes it so uniquely devastating is not just the damage they caused. It is the realization that the signs were there, that something in you registered them, and you chose, again and again, to explain them away, to give one more benefit of the doubt, to believe the words instead of watching the pattern, to protect the relationship from the truth that would have ended it sooner and cost you so much less. Machiavelli wrote about this with the kind of precision that only comes from watching it happen at the highest possible stakes. He watched princes trust the wrong counselors and lose everything. He watched alliances built on professed loyalty collapse the moment the power dynamic shifted. He watched men of genuine capability destroyed not by superior enemies, but by people they had welcomed into proximity, people who had learned everything necessary about them and used that knowledge the moment an opportunity arrived. And what he concluded was not that trust is foolish or that all men are snakes. He concluded something more useful and more demanding, that the ability to accurately read the nature of the people around you is not a cynical gift. It is a survival skill, and the man who has not developed it is not a man of generous spirit. He is a man of dangerous naivety. This is not a video about becoming paranoid. It is not an invitation to treat every person in your life as a potential threat or to build walls so high that nothing genuine can get through. The Stoics, who understood human nature as clearly as anyone in the ancient world, never counseled that. What they counseled was discernment, the quiet, patient, consistent practice of watching what people actually do rather than simply receiving what they say, of allowing behavior over time to tell you something truer than any declaration of loyalty or friendship or shared values ever could, because the snake in your life is almost never identifiable from a single moment. He reveals himself across a long series of moments that, taken individually, each have a reasonable explanation. Taken together, they have only one. If there is someone in your life right now who makes you feel vaguely unsettled without being able to fully name why, this video is for you. If you have ever looked back at a betrayal and seen with painful clarity the signs you missed along the way, this video is for you. And if you are serious about building a life and an inner circle that are genuinely worthy of the work you are putting in, then developing this capacity is not optional. It is foundational. Consider subscribing, because this channel exists for exactly that kind of honest, philosophically grounded development of the skills most men are never taught to build. Why good men miss the signs. Before we name the signs themselves, we have to understand why capable, intelligent men consistently miss them. Because this is not a problem that only affects the naive or the inexperienced. Some of the most analytically sharp men you will ever meet have been devastated by people they should have seen coming, and the reason is not a failure of intelligence. It is something more specific and more correctable than that. The first reason is the fundamental attribution error, operating in reverse. When someone we like does something that gives us pause, we instinctively attribute it to the situation rather than to their character. He was under pressure. She was having a difficult time. The circumstances were unusual. This is not generosity, though it feels like generosity. It is a cognitive preference for the explanation that allows the relationship to continue without disruption, because seeing the behavior clearly, as a window into character rather than an exception to it, would require a response we are not yet ready to make. The second reason is what Machiavelli identified as the intoxicating effect of being chosen. When a charismatic person selects you for their confidence, when they share things with you they claim to share with no one else, when they position you as the one person who truly understands them. The flattery of that selection is powerful enough to override the analytical faculties that would otherwise be working clearly. You are not just evaluating them at that point. You are evaluating them while they are simultaneously managing your evaluation of them. And they are almost always better at that management than you are at the detection. The third reason is something Carl Jung named with precision: the shadow. Every human being carries a shadow, the parts of themselves they have not examined, the patterns they have not taken full responsibility for, the blind spots shaped by their own wounds and unmet needs. And the snake, almost without exception, finds the edge of your shadow and operates there. He identifies what you most want to believe about yourself, what you most want to receive from a relationship, what you most want to be true about the people close to you, and he delivers exactly that. Not because he knows you with the depth of genuine understanding, but because he is skilled at finding and feeding the specific hungers that make you susceptible to his particular kind of manipulation. Understanding these three dynamics does not make you immune to them, but it gives you the one thing that can interrupt them: the ability to name what is happening in the moment it is happening rather than years later in retrospect. And that naming, that quiet act of honest recognition, is where the capacity Machiavelli was describing actually begins. Sign 1. What they do to others, they will eventually do to you. This is perhaps the most consistently ignored signal available to any man with open eyes, and Machiavelli understood it as fundamental. The way a person treats the people below them, around them, or behind them is not separate from who they are. It is exactly who they are, seen without the management they apply when they want something from you specifically. Watch how the person treats people who cannot do anything for them: the server at a restaurant, the assistant in an office, the acquaintance who has fallen from a position of influence. Watch what happens to people in their life who were once close to them and are no longer. Do those former relationships end with dignity and mutual respect? Or do they end with the other person suddenly being redefined as a fool, a user, a person who was never really trustworthy? Pay close attention to the last one, because the man who speaks about every former close relationship as a story of his own victimization and the other person's fundamental deficiency is telling you something important. Not about all those other people, about the pattern he generates wherever he goes, and about what he will one day say about you. Epictetus was unambiguous on this point. He taught that character is not a private thing, visible only in the moments we choose to reveal it. It is a continuous expression, legible in every interaction, most clearly in the ones where there is no audience worth performing for. The person who is charming to you and cold to everyone else is not showing you two different sides of themselves. They are showing you a single unified character, one that performs warmth where warmth is useful and dispenses with it where it isn't. You are currently in the useful category. The moment that changes, so will the warmth. This is not cynicism. It is pattern recognition. The genuinely warm person, the person of authentic character, is recognizably consistent across the full range of their relationships and interactions. Not identically warm to everyone, because wisdom includes discernment about where to invest, but never systematically cold to the people who cannot offer them anything. That coldness, whenever you observe it, is a window. Most men choose not to look through it, because what they see would require them to reconsider someone they have already decided to trust. But the window is always there, and it is always honest. Sign 2. Their words and their actions occupy different worlds. Machiavelli observed that men are generally more swayed by words than by actions, because words are immediate and emotionally engaging while actions unfold slowly and require more sustained attention to interpret accurately. The snake understands this intuitively, whether or not he has ever articulated it consciously. He invests heavily in his narrative, in the story of who he is, what he values, what he has been through, what he stands for. And that narrative is often genuinely compelling, because it has been refined through repeated use on people who responded to it. The discipline required to see through this is not complicated, but it runs directly against several natural human tendencies. It requires you to hold the narrative and the behavior in your attention simultaneously, and to be honestly curious about the gap between them, not to dismiss the narrative but to treat it as a hypothesis rather than a fact. A hypothesis that the person's actual behavior over time will either confirm or refute. The snake's words and actions do not match, not always dramatically, not in ways that are easy to challenge, but consistently, in the small ways that a man watching carefully begins to accumulate. He speaks with great conviction about loyalty and then quietly positions himself advantageously at the first sign that the loyalty might cost him something. He talks extensively about honesty and then delivers information in ways that are technically true but functionally misleading. He declares his commitment to you in moments of warmth and then behaves in the practical choices of ordinary life as though that commitment has a ceiling you weren't told about. Individually, each of these instances has an explanation. Taken together, they have a pattern. And the discipline of honest pattern recognition, of allowing the accumulation of small inconsistencies to speak more loudly than any single compelling declaration, is one of the most important skills Machiavelli was pointing at when he told his readers to watch what people do rather than listen to what they say, not as a cynical dismissal of language, as an empirical commitment to evidence over assertion. The evidence of a man's character is always in his behavior. His words tell you what he wants you to believe. His behavior tells you what is actually true. Sign 3. They redefine the past to serve the present. This is a subtler signal than the others, and it requires a specific kind of attentiveness to catch. But once you know to look for it, it becomes one of the most reliable indicators of a fundamentally dishonest relationship with reality, which is the core of what makes a person genuinely dangerous to be close to. The snake has an unusually flexible relationship with what happened. Not the ordinary human tendency to remember events in a self-flattering light, which is nearly universal and mostly benign. Something more systematic than that. A consistent pattern of revising the established record of events whenever the current record creates inconvenience for him. He remembers conversations differently than they occurred. He reframes past commitments in ways that happen to eliminate his obligation to honor them. He reconstructs the sequence of events in disputes in ways that always, somehow, place the origin of the problem with someone else. And when you push back with your own clear recollection, he does not simply disagree. He questions your reliability as a narrator of your own experience. Gently, often, with apparent concern for your perception, but insistently. Carl Jung wrote about the danger of the person who cannot own their shadow, who has constructed a self-image so dependent on their own righteousness that any evidence threatening that image must be expelled rather than integrated. The snake cannot afford to be wrong, not because he has high standards, but because his entire operating system depends on the story he tells about himself remaining intact. And the past is always subject to revision in service of that story. What he said last month, what was agreed between you, what actually happened in the moment that is now being disputed, all of it is raw material to be shaped into whatever the current narrative requires. You will feel this as a persistent, low-level disorientation, a sense that your footing in shared reality is somehow unstable around this person. That conversations end with you questioning your own recollection rather than his. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of testing your impressions before accepting them, of holding your own perceptions up to honest scrutiny. That discipline is valuable and right, but there is a difference between honest self-examination and the confusion deliberately generated by a person who has learned that destabilizing your confidence in your own perception is the most effective way to prevent you from holding him accountable for his. Trust the disorientation. It is information. It is your own accurate perception of something real. Sign 4. They are allergic to genuine accountability. Machiavelli noted that the men most dangerous to a prince's stability were not the ones who disagreed openly, whom he could address directly, but the ones who operated in the spaces between direct challenges, who never quite crossed a line that could be clearly named and responded to, who maintained the appearance of loyalty while systematically undermining it through 1,000 small actions that each had a plausible, innocent interpretation. And the thing that made them most difficult to address was that they had learned to treat any attempt to hold them accountable as itself a kind of aggression against them. This is the snake's most reliable defensive mechanism, the conversion of accountability into attack. When you raise a concern, he experiences it as an accusation. When you name something that bothered you, he reframes it as evidence of your unfair treatment of him. When you point to a pattern of behavior, he finds a way to make the conversation about your pattern of raising concerns. And before you fully understand how it happened, you are in the position of defending your right to have the original conversation rather than having it. The original concern has dissolved into a meta-dispute about whether you were right to raise it, which almost always ends with you feeling that you were not. This is not accidental. The dissolution of accountability into a counter-grievance is a learned technique, refined through repeated application in the relationships of someone who has discovered that it works, that it is possible to escape the consequence of your behavior, not by changing your behavior, but by making the conversation about the behavior costly enough for the other person that they eventually stop initiating it. And most men, wanting to maintain the relationship and not wanting to be seen as relentlessly critical, eventually do stop. They learn to manage their reactions around this person rather than address their concerns with them. And that management, that quiet accommodation of the unaddressed pattern, is how the snake becomes progressively more embedded in a life he is steadily degrading. Seneca wrote that we should never be afraid of the discomfort of honest conversation with the people who matter to us, that the friendship which cannot survive honesty is not friendship worth preserving. The right response to being held accountable for your behavior, if you are a person of genuine character, is not indignation. It is curiosity or acknowledgement, or honest disagreement that engages with the substance of the concern, rather than redirecting to the character of the person who raised it. When someone consistently does the latter, consistently converts your concern into evidence of your problem rather than a reflection of theirs, they are telling you something true about the limits of what honest relationship is possible with them. Sign 5. They invest in your dependency, not your development. This is perhaps the most insidious signal because it arrives wearing the costume of genuine care. The snake is often remarkably generous in ways that create obligation, remarkably available in ways that generate emotional reliance, remarkably invested in your problems in ways that position him as indispensable to navigating them. And for a time, this feels like exactly the kind of loyal, committed friendship or partnership that every serious man wants in his corner. It is only over time and with the specific quality of attention Machiavelli prescribed that the shape of the investment becomes clear. The man or woman of genuine character who cares about your growth is invested in your capability, in your developing the tools to navigate your own life effectively, in your becoming more independent, more clear-sighted, more grounded in your own judgment over time. Their support makes you stronger. Their counsel builds your capacity to counsel yourself. And when you are thriving and need them less, they are genuinely glad, because your flourishing was always the point. The snake is invested in something else. He is invested in being needed, in being the person you turn to, depend on, cannot imagine navigating without. His help tends to solve the immediate problem while subtly preventing you from developing the capacity to solve it yourself. His counsel tends to position him as the essential interpreter of your own experience. His generosity tends to come with invisible strings that you only feel when you try to move in a direction he hasn't endorsed. And when you begin to thrive independently, when you demonstrate that you are developing real capability and real clarity that doesn't require his mediation, he does not celebrate it. Something shifts, a subtle withdrawal, a new problem introduced, a doubt seeded about whether the direction you are moving is actually right for you. Aristotle's highest form of friendship was what he called friendship of virtue. Two people who are genuinely good for each other's development, who make each other more fully themselves rather than more dependent on each other. That standard is the right one to apply, not whether someone is generous or available or emotionally present, whether their presence in your life over time is making you more yourself or less, more capable or more dependent, more clear-sighted about your own nature and your own path, or more confused, more reliant on their interpretation of it. That direction, the direction of development versus dependency, tells you almost everything you need to know about what the relationship is actually for. Sign 6. They perform their values rather than live them. Machiavelli understood that the most dangerous advisor was the man who was adept at appearing virtuous in the moments when appearance was most valued and most observed. Who knew which values his prince held most dear, and performed those values with sufficient consistency and skill that the performance passed as character. The performance is always detectable, eventually, but only by someone who is committed to watching the whole performance, rather than just the highlighted moments the performer most wants you to see. The snake performs his values loudly and publicly. He speaks with unusual frequency and force about loyalty, honesty, fairness, integrity, not as a man who has actually internalized those things and so takes them as a given, but as a man who has identified them as the values that will generate trust in the people he most wants to trust him. The genuine man of character rarely needs to announce his values. He is too busy living them, and living them leaves him with less occasion to narrate them. But the man whose values are primarily a presentation tends to talk about them more, especially in the early stages of a relationship, when the presentation is most important and his actual behavioral history with you is shortest. Watch particularly for the gap between the proclaimed value and the pressure test. Everyone can demonstrate loyalty when loyalty is costless, when it requires only approval and no sacrifice. The genuine expression of character happens when the value meets friction, when loyalty would cost something real, when honesty would be inconvenient or socially awkward, when fairness would require the person to accept less than they could get away with taking. In those moments, the performed value and the lived value diverge visibly. The performer will find a way to explain why this particular situation is an exception, why the principle doesn't quite apply here, why what looks like a deviation is actually, when you understand the full context, consistent with what he has always stood for. And if you are paying honest attention, you will notice that the exceptions always happen to fall in his favor, that the full context, properly understood, always happens to be the context in which he benefits. This is the signal, not a single exception, the direction of the exceptions, because the man of genuine character, when he falls short of his values, tends to fall short in ways that cost him rather than in ways that happen to benefit him. His lapses reveal the limits of his capacity. The snake's lapses reveal the limits of his commitment. Those are very different things, and the difference is always visible to anyone watching clearly enough. Sign 7, crisis reveals what comfort concealed. Machiavelli returned to this theme repeatedly in his writing on how to assess men, that comfort and good fortune are unreliable environments for evaluating character, because in comfort and good fortune, even mediocre character can appear adequate. The genuine test is adversity, pressure, the moment when what a man actually values is in conflict with what it would be convenient or safe or profitable to value. In that moment, and almost only in that moment, you see what you are actually dealing with. The snake in your life may have been reliable, generous, and apparently committed for years. And then something changed, a shift in your relative positions. A moment when supporting you would have cost him something he wasn't willing to pay. A conflict in which your interests and his interests were genuinely opposed and he had to choose between them. And in that moment, the presentation that had held through years of comfortable alignment was stress-tested for the first time. And it did not hold. This is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle. A silence where you expected support. An absence when your position became uncertain and your value to him less clear. A discovery that while you were dealing with something genuinely difficult, he was positioning himself in ways that depended on the ground shifting under you. A realization that the loyalty you had assumed was structural was actually conditional on conditions that no longer held. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the nature of testing relationships through difficulty, not with distrust, but with honest attention. He understood that no amount of peacetime observation tells you what a relationship is made of, that the truth of what any person is to you and what you are to them is only fully revealed when it is put under genuine weight. That is not a reason to manufacture crises or to test people artificially. It is a reason to pay careful attention when genuine crises occur naturally, and to allow what you observe in those moments to update your understanding of the person rather than being explained away by the affection accumulated in easier times. The snake is not revealed by his worst moments. When those worst moments exist in isolation, he is revealed by the pattern, by the consistent direction his behavior takes when the cost of genuine character becomes real. What to do with what you see. Here is where most men get into difficulty because seeing clearly is only half of what is required. The harder half is deciding what to do with what you have seen. And the temptation, almost universal among men who are fundamentally decent and who value loyalty, is to continue giving the benefit of the doubt past the point where the doubt has been answered, to keep finding explanations for patterns that have already explained themselves, to protect the investment in the relationship rather than honestly accounting for what the relationship has actually been. Machiavelli was clear about the cost of this delay. He observed that problems addressed early cost far less than problems left to develop to their natural conclusion. And the snake left in proximity to your life and your work will always, in time, take that development to its conclusion, not because you did not deserve better, because the nature of someone operating without genuine loyalty or genuine character is that they will always, when the conditions align, act in accordance with that nature, not out of malice necessarily, out of inevitability. The action does not always need to be dramatic. It does not require confrontation, accusation, or the public naming of what you have seen. In fact, Machiavelli would have counseled against most of those responses because they give the snake information about what you know, time to construct a counter-narrative, and an opportunity to perform wounded innocence for an audience. The more effective response, in most cases, is quieter and more strategic. It is the gradual and deliberate contraction of proximity, the reduction of access, the protection of the specific things, your plans, your vulnerabilities, your genuine inner circle, that this person would most effectively use against you. Not a dramatic exit unless the situation requires it. A careful, considered reduction of what is available to be exploited. Seneca wrote that it is not enough to remove yourself from danger. You must remove danger from yourself, meaning the internal work of understanding what made you susceptible in the first place. Because the snake does not create your vulnerabilities. He finds them. And the man who has done honest work on his own shadow, who understands his specific hungers and blind spots, and the particular ways he can be managed, is the man who is hardest to find a way into. That internal work is not cynical. It is the most responsible form of care you can extend to the relationships and the life you are genuinely trying to build. The harder question. There is a question underneath everything this video has been building toward, and it is worth addressing directly because most discussions of this topic avoid it. The question is this: if you have been close to someone who fits these patterns, what does that say about you? What does it mean that you let them in, that you trusted them, that you extended yourself for them in ways that now look in retrospect like naivety? It means you are human. It means you had the instinct for genuine connection, and that instinct was exploited. It means you were operating with a generosity of spirit that was met with something that didn't deserve it. None of that is a verdict against your character. Some of it may be pointing at patterns worth examining, at specific blind spots or unmet needs that made you more susceptible to this particular presentation. That examination is worth doing, and worth doing honestly. But it is not an indictment. Carl Jung said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Part of what makes betrayal so painful is that it threatens the self-image of the man who experienced it. He thought he was a better judge of people than this. He thought his instincts were more reliable. He thought he knew the difference between genuine and performed loyalty. And discovering that he didn't, or that he did and chose not to act on it, is a challenge to a self-concept that feels important to preserve. But that challenge, engaged honestly rather than deflected, is one of the most productive experiences a serious man can have, because it does not teach you that trust is foolish. It teaches you the difference between trust that is earned incrementally through demonstrated character and trust that is extended preemptively in response to compelling presentation. That distinction, once genuinely understood, changes how you build every important relationship that follows.